Okay, back at it again. Okay, so this is part of the larger diorama, and I'm putting all the figures out that I had painted before, trying to figure out exactly what the first layer of this sort of playable tabletop diorama is going to be. So because I have all this, I'm trying to figure out to give enough space for people, for the figures to be able to move around, as well as something that looks like it would be sort of a hideout. And and so then I had already sort of drawn a lot of the stuff out, so I don't know. I'm not exactly sure what I keep talking about and pointing to, but those are the entrances. But I'm trying to figure out, some way of making it realistic. If somebody were there to try to protect their sides and their stuff from robbers, as well as giving them some easy access to get out if they have to. So I have some future plans for this, but at the time being, this is what I have, and I'm still just kind of pointing around all over the place. So, um, I don't really have anything else to say about that. We'll get into that. Here we go. Okay, the next clip. Once I figure out the sizes for these things, I just cut out the little pieces, and then I'm trying to just sort of design on the fly what the walls will end up looking like. I do this for, each little panel or whatever the case to make it as easy as possible. So ultimately, I am not going to, show you how I draw out the bricks. There's a ton of videos online about that, so that's not even a problem. So the thing is that what I do is I get the sort of the pieces that I want, and then I get them down, and then I draw the lines for the bricks and mark them down and all that kind of stuff. And then after that, I start creating the sort of the breaking parts and stuff like that, the stuff that breaks apart if it were falling down. Okay, so this is pretty much what one side looks like after I've sort of cut it around and stuff like that. But the major points that I wanted to show here is the fact that you really need to break it up on the tops, to make it look like it's genuinely part of the wall has fallen off and eventually has eroded away. So, that's done the same way as the sides, but there's a lot of pulling on the foam and stuff like that. And I think, even though that I don't really show this part here, I think I actually end up pulling some of the brick from the faces too. So then that way there's a little bit more, I don't know, a little bit more believability. See, there's a couple little brick pullouts there that I've made. Ultimately, everything's just sort of put together the same way. Now, I didn't design this and put the bricks in mind for the corners because I knew I was going to do some buttresses on the sides. And I think I'm going to show that in the next clip here, I think. And yes, okay, here we go. So here's me pointing to the thing again. And so I made a bunch of these little things, not accurately to size or whatever. I just figured I would make a bunch of standard size ones and sort of cut them down as necessary. But excuse me. So, it very easily covers over the lines, and that way I don't have to really worry about anything. And then I made some smaller ones just to sort of, make them blend in a little bit to make it more, realistic. I figure that this whole church has been up for a long time, so, it's seen a lot of things. So I made this, I just freehanded the window, and I freehanded all the rest of the stuff. And I traced some paper behind it so I can get it the size, and so I can make it match, but it was off. But I just made that main layer out of cardboard, and I used chipboard for like smaller versions on the, on both sides to create some dimension. But that was a waste of time. So just do the cardboard. By the time it's that small, and by the time that you fill in the gaps, it's going to kind of blend it all in together. You won't notice it. So just, in hindsight, I just should have done the cardboard. It would have been a lot easier. Saved probably about an hour of time. I say an hour only because it took a really long time to cut those windows out by hand. Alright, so here is everything dry. So I know that a lot of people would probably do the texture on the walls and stuff like that probably before putting it all together, because you have to be careful so you don't rip or bend anything that's actually already happened. This stuff, because it's long and it doesn't have any kind of support weight on it, you know, it's pretty susceptible to potentially just snapping off. But I wanted to do it afterwards, like when it was put together, because I wasn't quite sure what it was going to look like, and I wanted to do the weathering once I saw it built, so I could put the weathering where it needed to be. So I had already glued this stuff onto the top. I had video of it, but I don't know where it went. But now it's just me sort of cutting it freehand and cutting some like little bevels on the front and back sides of them. I kind of enjoyed doing this, or not enjoyed doing it. I thought it was better to do it this way, as trying to make it accurate, because it kind of gave some real depth to some of the weathering. You know, you could see it was unlevel, and it just looked more realistic. I'm not going to show it, but eventually I'm going to cut like little panels out of it to make it look like it's in segments, whereas just, you know, when I put it together it was just one long piece of foam. So here's the window. Now that all the layers have dried, now I'm manually putting this sort of drywall compound to fill in that cardboard gap. I think maybe in hindsight I probably should have just used closed cell foam. That would have probably been a lot easier and saved me a whole step. You know, but it is what it is. Didn't mean to. It is what it is. Okay, so because of that, I had to go back and sand it all down, which is where a lot of the detail kind of got lost on me. So I wedged it in there. It's probably not the best way of doing this, but I wedged it in there, and I just sort of poured sort of like a glue line on it to make it work. It was a little off center anyway, so I figured, well, you know, I'll just blame that on years of decay. But once it finally glued solid, then I just kind of went back in and filled in the gaps with drywall compound. And then I, you know, once that dried, sanded it back down a little bit to make it smooth. And then I think this next clip is going to be, you know, kind of fixing some of the brick. Yeah, okay. See, it kind of got everywhere. So I'm just going back and kind of cleaning up the lines so the bricks are a little bit more open and exposed. But, okay, so, you know, a key point is to put these little pieces of foam brick all over the place. A lot of the stuff is actually stuff I had ripped off, so I was able to put some other brick back on to kind of turn it sideways, as if some of the brick just sort of fell on top. And everything is gray. I didn't like gray. I was deciding against it, but I've decided to go ahead and just go to finish the step, which is putting some glue down and then putting this sort of ballast on there. Now, if I were going to do a different color, I would probably use the ballast that was the same color to match the walls, you know, unless you're going to repaint it. In this case, I knew I was going to repaint the whole thing, so it didn't matter. I just wanted that grit on the top. So this is folk art. I think it's linen. The color is linen. I'm being kind of haphazard with it. I don't care if it fills in the gap or the cracks or whatever the case may be. I tend to find that I like using like a medium dark gray as opposed to black, because when I put on things like some of the darker colors for like the wash, it'll actually get into different cracks and then make it darker. Where if you use just black, you know, it's just going to be black and you can't really see it. So with gray, it kind of adds a little bit more value to it without having to do a whole lot of extra steps. And, you know, there are a whole lot of grays out there to use. So, you know, I guess it depends on, you know, what type of rock and stone you're working with. But in this case, I used like 3 coats of paint on the gray. It just wouldn't cover it all. And then I think I used 2 coats on the linen. So with this, I'm just using, I don't know, various colors that range around that linen color. Mostly just a couple shades darker. And then I'm just sort of adding a little bit of paint here and there so to create some variation. So you can already see where I'm just kind of creating some different color bricks. And then I do that same thing for, I add a little bit of gray afterwards just to kind of add to the dimensionality. Let's see. Okay, so this is my go-to on the washes these days. It's from Golden, and then I'll pop it up there. Yeah, I'll pop it up there on the side. And then I use about for this first stage, actually the first 2 stages, I use 50% paint and 50% water, roughly. And then, and click. Okay, so the reason is that I want to create value. And that's why I like this a lot more. I can create a lot of value with with very little work. So I'm just trying to create, that overall tone. And then, let's say I'm going back through, and then I'm hitting certain areas that are going to be a little darker, splotching certain areas and stuff like that. Most of the time, I'd say I'm just using a brush. I guess you can use other things, but it's just a little easier for me with the brush, as long as you don't create a bunch of brush strokes. So I'm doing one wall at a time. If you notice, I'm not doing anything on the inside, and the reason is because I'm not really quite sure what I'm looking for with the paint. It's kind of like I'm doing it as I go along and making corrections, and so I don't want to go too far ahead and mess it all up or have to go back and redo the whole thing. I'd rather just do one little bitty wall. So this is the same golden paint that I use. That's like kind of like a liquid smoke kind of thing. But I'm going back on here, and the way I'm envisioning it, it's just this really old sort of, I don't know if there's a bunch of trees around now, but there's trees nearby, so it's like this grove, and everything is just sort of fallen on it and grown on it and things along those lines. So a lot of the stuff is really, really dark from just water staining, which translates to the fact that water staining is going to come from the top down. I'm thinking that maybe at one point, like, it originally burned down, and then it's just been, eroding away ever since. Probably people used it as target practice as they were driving by, that type of thing, or, riding by. So this is probably 3 or 4, maybe even 5 stages later. I do one coat, and then I just kind of go along with it and do another coat until I feel comfortable with it. And as I do it, I typically kind of go up the ladder. So I do, like a 50-50, and then I'll do like a 50%, or excuse me, like 75% paint, 25% water, and then I just kind of, go back and back and back until it's just pure paint. So that way, those are just the final touches, just on the edge accents and things along those lines. The nice thing I love about this golden paint is that it goes a really long way, and because they have extenders and things like that, this stuff dries pretty quick, so you can actually add a little extender or a little bit of matte medium, or other mediums, and fill it out a little bit. It won't thin out on you. So of course you have to do the edges, because that's where water likes to get trapped, and more importantly, it also, when you're looking at the model from the side, it actually accentuates the shadow areas. So now this is my bird poop phase. So this is essentially, I'm using linen. If you use white, it's not going to look correctly, because eventually bird poop might be white, but as it oxidizes, it turns yellow for the most part. It's off white. So the thing is, I wanted to make, so everything that has a ledge, everything that has a place where a bird would eventually like to land, is where I'm kind of putting these little streaks. Excuse me. But it's kind of a hit and miss thing. You know what it is. Now there's also lime deposits, from limestone that just streak because of that. So this is kind of a little bit of both, but I think ultimately it's just bird poop. And it works that way. Alright, so this is my watered down, this is just some apple barrel paint. I just kind of picked 2 colors. I think one's like ivy and another one's evergreen or something like that. And these are very sort of haphazardly just kind of tinting the bottom of the walls, from moss and water wash up and all these other miscellaneous things that are happening. Now I'm going to do a lot more to it, but this is the first phase, and so which is why I'm not trying to streak it over and make it a solid color. I'm just trying to add some more dimension when you're looking at it. And then the green one is the second apply. I don't show this, but the light one is just some accent. And then okay, see, so here we go. So as I say, some of the stuff that was just maybe a little lighter, then I'm going back and hitting it with some paint just to be on the safe side. This would probably be kind of the same way you do a sewer because of all that water laying in there. And so I'm just kind of making sure that. So now this is, you know, putting on like I don't really cut the glue down. I just kind of do, you know, Eileen's tacky glue, you know, and then just daub it on there. And this is, I think it's called Earth, Blended Earth or something like that. I can't remember the brand right off the top of my head. It's the one of the more popular ones. But I'm using that as the moss undertone to create that little bit of depth. I'm keeping it pretty shallow too, because, you know, that's just the first layer of moss that's grown and eventually maybe has died away, or it's just not getting enough, you know, oxygen to keep it thriving. But whatever it is, you know, it adds a little bit of an extra layer. I kind of run the philosophy that, you know, you do a bunch of little layers over and over and over, and eventually you'll probably cover up the very first one, but, you know, it is what it is, because that's what nature does. So I just kind of skipped through a little bit of this, went to the brown, went to the green, as you notice that, you know, like the idea of where the stuff hangs off of and kind of regrows. You know, typically moss doesn't really grow side to side. It kind of grows up and down, so you have to keep that in mind, depending on the moss. Now, a lot of moss would have probably covered that entire top, and you have to decide, I guess, where, if you want it to be realistic or if you want it to be aesthetically pleasing. And for me, it's kind of a little bit of both. I want to make sure it looks realistic as I can, like it would be growing in the real world, but then also make sure it looks good. So that's why it's not sort of really piled up everywhere. Now, I really love it when it just sort of clumps and drags like this, but it doesn't stick. And what I've noticed is that even when you put the glue on it to make it stick, you have to do 2 or 3 different levels just to kind of create some kind of depth in the growth. Okay, so here's me trying to save as much as I can from the thing. I don't like reusing the flock when it falls, because it gets different colors into it and it gets some other stuff. So I usually kind of put it off to the side as sort of like the spare stuff when I just want some accent colors with the various things. I don't want it to taint the main color that I have. So I don't throw it away, I just keep it somewhere separate. So this is me just sort of spraying the whole thing down once I've gotten all the moss that I'm comfortable with. I don't really like doing it this way, but the glue, this is Eileen's glue with, I think it's like a 3-to-1 ratio, so it's actually pretty watered down. But you have to keep cleaning out the tip every time you're done with it, otherwise it's just going to glue shut. So I had to spray it on kind of heavy and then go back and then dab all the flat surfaces up. You know, the flock really soaks it up a lot, but unfortunately it will pool up on your walls and then leave not a good looking finish on there, so you definitely have to dop all that stuff back off. And then at the same time it actually kind of adds a layer of protection, so I'm kind of like ready for the next level or the next phase, as it were. So this is just straw, some stuff like that. I have a bunch of like maybe 5 or 6 different types of string and straw and stuff just to see which would work. This is in green, and I do another one in brown here. I think I might show it afterwards, but I'm not really going to get into the vining that much. I think there are some things out there. I've been planning on maybe some dedicated foliage videos, but if everyone thinks that, you know, like they want to see some dedicated stuff to vines and bushes and stuff like that, please, you know, leave a comment. Let me know if that's something you actually want to see, because I'm more than happy. I'm actually looking forward to maybe getting into seeing what works best. But anyway, I say a lot of the stuff is first time for me, but I learned a lot. So I say, and then application is kind of a bear. Now, there's one thing, there are a lot of ways to make it work faster. So I know that probably people will be more than happy to explain to me how to do it better in the comments. But I tried a few ways, and this was the only way that I had control over what I wanted to do. And again, at the end of the day, it took a lot longer, but it gives you the most control over what the finished product's going to look like. And again, that's the most important. I mean, if you're just trying to save time, you just avoid it. But this way, and like everything, I use a bunch of references. So before, I'm not showing you this, but I have, probably 8 or 9 references up on my computer just to try to make sure I can always just go back and see what real nature is doing. So this is like super leaf flock, something like that. I just bought a bunch of this. First time I ever played around with it, but I think it worked pretty well. And the new growth, the living growth, is the only thing that's going to get flock on it. And I went through this a couple different times. There is no good way, and the stuff gets a little stiff and it kind of gets out there. But honestly, I don't like the stuff that really lays down flat on the wall, because I know that a lot of vines kind of do that. But when you take a step back, you can notice that what's the best way of saying this? That there's dimension out. Sometimes the vine gets blocked and it kind of moves out a little bit, or maybe an animal moved it, and then it just kind of grows out that way. And so you have a little bit of dimension, and I think it looked better in the end. Took a long time, but probably about 3 or 4 more hours actually do the vining just for that. But and it's super glossy, so I'm going to end up using this Mod Podge to kind of spray it down and seal it up and try to make it flat. But incidentally, it does not make it that flat, so keep that in mind. It's still a little glossy.